This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Well, Jamal, in the midst of all the things going on, Afghanistan, Hurricane Ida, the COVID Delta pandemic, there's a lot to talk about today. But ironically, one of the things that's dropped from the radar is there are a lot of interesting international problem hotspot areas brewing right now, which have not made the mainstream media. And today we're going to be watching and listening to an interview you did with Professor Abdelkader Berrahmoun, who is a faculty at Middlebury Institute in Monterey, who's going to talk about some real unusual and kind of problematic things going on between Algeria and Morocco, which I was surprised to hear about, even in how close attention I pay to these things. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Afghanistan and then in Palestine. So we got a lot to talk about today.
That's right, Jess. And of course, Morocco and Algeria is not going to come in the radar. You know, it's just like a small footnote in the media here with everything else going on with Afghanistan, as you said, the hurricane, COVID, and you name it. But they have strained relations for decades, and they've hit a low point just last week that they've actually suspended diplomatic relations between the two countries. And so we, Professor, as you said, Abdelkader Berrahmoun will shed light on these outstanding problems and if this will lead to a war or not. He does not think so, but anyway, he gives us a very good historical background about what's going on and good analysis because it's actually it could escalate further.
Absolutely.
But it has not yet. And let's watch and listen to Abdelkader Berrahmoun. Algeria is cutting diplomatic relations with Morocco. This is according to its foreign minister, Ramadan Lamamra, accusing its neighbor of hostile action. Morocco and Algeria have strained relations for decades, mainly over the issue of Western Sahara. Also last week, Algeria said lethal wildfires engulfing the country were the work of two groups it had labeled terrorist groups, including the MAK group, which seeks independence for the Kabylie region in which Algeria said was backed by Morocco. Joining us to shed light on these issues, Abdelkader Berrahmoun, assistant professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. Welcome to Arab Talk, Abdelkader.
Thank you, Jamal, for the invitation.
So before we delve into the weeds of the problem, please give us some background information about the old dispute.
The issues between the two countries go back to the 1950s during the Algerian Revolution, where it is claimed, it says that Morocco had informed the French colonial rule at that time of an airplane that was boarding few of the Algerian revolution leaders. So the airplane was hijacked in 1956. Other issues began after the Algerian independence in 1962, after almost 8 years of bloody war of independence and 132 years of French colonial rule. So in 1963, Morocco began claiming some Algerian lands, and they claimed that Bashar and Tindouf, especially on the southwestern part of Algeria, they claimed that those lands were Moroccans. So a war occurred at that time in 1963, and France supported the kingdom of Morocco, and that was another issue. So what is happening now as conflict and the rupture of diplomatic relations between the two countries is not new. It dates back to history.
So it goes back way back to the Algerian War of Independence.
Yes.
So taking us back,
before.
Yeah, even before. So taking us back some years back on, I think December 18th, 1975, Algeria's president then at the time, Houari Boumediene, took the decision to expel all Moroccan nationals from the country due to that dispute over the same issue, about the Western Sahara. I think about 350,000 Moroccans were expelled from Algeria. Do you expect something similar to this to happen today?
Well, today I think I believe it's different because when we look at the press conference of the Algerian foreign minister, Lamamra, in his press conference, he said that the diplomatic relations are cut off, but consular relations are open, will still exist. So that's an indication that I don't believe that there will be any war. I don't believe that Algeria will expel any Moroccans living in its land.
How many Moroccans approximately live and work in Algeria?
Thousands, not just working, but we had Algeria and Morocco had historical relations, and even when I spoke about the issues during the War of Independence. However, we have to remember that Morocco was also an ally, was supporting the Algerian Revolution. And they offered and they opened their borders to Algerian revolutionaries and Algerian people, as well as Tunisia, same case. So we cannot forget this side of history. The historical relationship exists for hundreds of years, and there is also intermarriage between Algerians and Moroccans. So there are families on the borders, especially the southern western part of Algeria.
So do you think this is more like government to government, but not a dispute between the people?
I think the two populations, the two people, they are closer historically. They have a lot in common, more common, elements than differences: religion, languages, custom, traditions, history, etc. So. Between the two governments, that the region, the Maghreb, is always a competition. So the two are competing to be the leader. When we look at the Maghreb region, there are 5 countries: Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, and Libya. Libya is in what happened in Libya with the civil war.
Mm-hmm.
Mauritania and Tunisia are small countries with small armies and less resources. Then the two countries that are left are Algeria and Morocco. They are bigger in size and also in population, and also the military expenditures are high. So that's another that's a concern as well, because there is more spending on the military. And we know that whenever a country spends more on its military capabilities, especially in the Arab world, there is less democracy. So, so you have the two countries competing to be the leader of the region. And also, of course, at the international stage, it's very, it's significant, because whoever leads that part of the world, that region, is considered the powerful state or the powerful entity that international or superpowers have to consult. And there are a lot of gains, political, economic gains, etc.
So the Algerian foreign minister cited an accumulation of grievances. We talked about not just the Western Sahara against Morocco. He denounced, and I was reading, massive and systematic acts of espionage by Morocco, a reference to allegations that the kingdom's security services used Pegasus spyware developed by the Israeli NSO group against its officials and its citizens. What role this, because there is a shift, as Algeria is probably the biggest supporter of the Palestinian independence in the entire Arab world. And what role that normalization, for example, the deal between Morocco and Israel in December, played to kind of pour gasoline onto that tension between Rabat and Algiers?
The role of normalization with Israel by Morocco in December 2020 was significant, because that was the first time that we had Israel on our borders, on Algerian borders. When you establish a relationship, the relationship between Morocco and Israel did not begin now. It started in the past, from the 1960s. I give you just an example that in the 1963 Desert War between the two countries, Israel, there is an article written by an Israeli researcher, I believe in 2013 or 18, mentioning that Israel sent airplanes, military airplanes, through France, of course, to Morocco to fight the war. So that it is not new. And when I say Morocco, I talk about the Moroccan government. I'm not talking about the people. So going back to your question about Israeli, the normalization of relationship between Morocco and Israel is significant. One of the also, and I think I believe that Algeria sees this as a big, threat to its stability. Also, the what happened in August of this year, on August 11th, when the Israeli foreign minister visited Morocco, he allegedly, he said, or he claimed that Algeria was supporting, the presence of Iran in North Africa, and that and he blamed Algeria for opposing, to accept Israel as an observer in the African Union.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about this next. This is, you're mentioning, just to clarify, this is the first visit of the Israeli foreign minister, Lapid, is the
Yes.
current foreign minister. He said that his concerns were based on fears. He said fears Algeria was getting close to Iran. I'm just quoting his word,
Yes.
as well as the campaign it waged against the admission of Israel as an observer member of the African Union.
Yes. So Algeria never had any Israeli, relationship or diplomatic relationship with Israel, and it has a very, very strong support historically to the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian people. This is I believe, the stand and the position of the Moroccan kingdom or government in order normalizing a relationship with Israel was a deal that was made with Donald Trump, with the U.S. So the deal was you normalize a relationship with Israel, and we recognize your sovereignty on the Western Sahara. So
you're right. This is you're referring to the normalization deal between Morocco and Israel in December, also, which triggered the tensions between Rabat and Algeria because the U.S. recognized Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara as part of the accord. And let's just make that connection. This came very shortly after Donald Trump also recognized Israel's sovereignty over the occupied Syrian Golan Heights.
Yes.
So Morocco saw that this is our opportunity to get the commitment of the United States, just like, they don't care about United Nations resolutions or what the people want. They figured we're going to play the same game that Israel plays. As long as the United States gives us the green light, then we're okay.
And that's a very dangerous game, because you see now militarization of the region. One factor in the issue or the diplomatic relation between Algeria and Morocco and the cause of cutting off the relationship is that in July 2021 of this year, the permanent representative, the Moroccan permanent representative at the UN, distributed a document, and that was the first time that a Moroccan official did that. He distributed the document at the non-aligned group session, claiming or saying that the region of Kabylia or the Kabyle region is located in the in the northeastern part of Algeria, and it's populated by. I am not going to use Berbers, but I'm going to use Amazigh.
Amazigh, yeah.
So in that document, he called for, and that's a very dangerous term, called for the self, for the autonomy of that region from Algeria, and the separation of that region from the country, and that the response of the Algerian government and people, even people from Kabylia, of course, opposed and felt threatened by this, document and by this act.
So they're playing the game. They're saying, okay, if Algeria supports the Polisario and you want independence of the Western Sahara, we're asking for independence of the Kabyle region.
Yes, and that's there are a lot of provocations. The same, Omar Hilal, the same official, was actually the General Secretary of the Foreign Affairs, or we call it here State Department. In 2000, I believe in 2006, and it was leaked by WikiLeaks in a mail or message to the U.S. ambassador, and that's another. It's interesting that he claimed that Algeria is representing Iran in North Africa. And also there were claims in the past that Algeria has a nuclear military program. So it is interesting the different games that that Morocco officials have been playing, and like I said, it's a very different, dangerous game.
It seems, look, Algeria has been very stable recently. It went through a lot of things in the past, post the revolution. And we saw what happened to Libya. Libya is a failed state. It's a total mess. Tunisia is barely making it. It was the center of, or the epicenter of the Arab Spring. Algeria was not affected by everything that was going around. It managed to protect itself. And it looks like there are forces now working from the outside, externally, to ruin this stability in Algeria. What's the connection between Algeria and Iran? They have diplomatic relations, but it's not, Algeria is not a, let's say, a Shia state, and they're trying to create, and then of course, we all know that Algeria was used for experimentation, nuclear experimentation by the French, not that they are developing their own nuclear weapons.
Yes, there are causes why Algerians did not go through, the Arab Spring in 2011. Several causes. One of them, and I believe is the main one, is that Algeria went through the so-called Arab Spring in 1988. And there were young, protests against the one-party system at that time. And after those, we call it the revolution of the youth. After that, in 1989, multi-party system, a new constitution was announced, and a multi-party system was established, and the political field was open. Between 89 and 90, the end of December 91, January 92, we had the first democratic experience in the Arab world. In December 1991, three political parties won the elections, the legislative elections. The Islamic Party, the Islamic Front of Salvation, and then the FFS, Socialist Forces, or Socialist Political Party, and the FLN, which is the Nationalist Party. It was National Liberation Front that launched the War of Independence against the French in 1954 to 19 1962. So the military institution did not or decided to interrupt that democratic process. And in January 1992, the president at that time, Shadli Benjedid, was forced to resign. So there was a coup. And from then, 1992, for almost 10 years, a civil war erupted. And we saw more than 250,000 people killed, and disappearance of, there are numbers, official and civil, but the number can go up to 20,000 people disappeared. So the Algerians went through the wars. They went through a very bloody war of independence that claimed, more than a million and a half of civilian, of martyrs. And then you have the civil war in the 1990s with 250,000 people killed. So the Arab Spring, when the Arab Spring happened in 2011, we had experience. We went through all this violence, all these marches, all the bloody the war consequences. So that's why Algeria, everybody was saying, okay, next after Egypt, after, Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, Algeria will be next. But they were wrong because of a lot of causes in our history. So what happened in 2019, the strategy of people shifted. So there was a non-violent marches twice a week, beginning of February 22nd, 2019, marches against popular marches against the renewal of the President Bouteflika's mandate. So for 2 years until COVID, until March 2020, because of COVID, the protesters and the Hirak, we call the popular movement Al-Hirak, decided to stop marches because of health reasons and because of COVID. So now in last few months, there were a lot of wildfires in Algeria, and Algeria accused Morocco of being the instigator and supporting the MAK, and also supporting Rashad. Rashad is an Islamist organization based in, they have members in England, their leaders, one of them, the well-known or the most known member of this organization is L'Arabi Zitout, and another member or other members in Switzerland. And so this organization is labeled by the Algerian government as a terrorist organization, as well as the MAK. So both of them are labeled now as a terrorist organization that seek the destabilization of Algeria. I mean, as far as the Hirak or the people's movement is legitimate. It has grievances because the people, when they marched every week from 2019 until COVID occurred, the grievances and the demands were for democratic Algeria, for against the Bouteflika's new mandate, against corruption.
A lot of legitimate claims, including high unemployment, the youth want to be employed. Going forward, because somehow Algeria thinks that Morocco is behind all these terrorist organizations, whether causing to destabilize the country or taking advantage of Algeria's problems with the fires. And this is, we should say, it's not exclusive to Algeria. We're having fires right here in California. There are fires in Greece. There are fires in Turkey. I mean, that's a whole different topic about global warming, but they are practically pouring gasoline on the fire, right, to destabilize the country.
I mean, these, and again, these are allegations. I mean, the wildfires, like you said, are caused by climate change. And so these are allegations. And there is no, until now, the Justice Department is still investigating. So these are allegations. And also any time that a country has political tensions internally, any country, doesn't matter where, specifically, well, in the Arab world, we have seen many cases. Anytime that a country has political tensions internally, it seeks an external, kind of enemy or external reason to sometimes to distract people from their own, reality, right. and also to strengthen their power. And it's both countries, I think Algeria and Morocco governments are, they, like both countries, the stability index is low. The internal stability is low.
So you feel both countries are distracting from their internal issues by creating a whole external issue.
It's not just that, but it's also at the regional and international stage. As I said before, you need. One of them has to be or wants to be the leader of the region.
So going forward, what do you think is going to happen now between Morocco and Algeria?
I don't believe there will be a war between the two countries. There is a danger, yes, it's a very dangerous situation, but the internal situations in both countries are not appropriate or ready for that. So I believe that there is tension, yes. There is militarization of the region, yes. But to go to the extent of launching a war, I don't believe that will happen.
Abdelkader Berrahmoun, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you very much for having me, Jamal, and it's very good to see you.
That's the voice and the face of Professor Abdelkader Berrahmoun, assistant professor at Middlebury Institute in Monterey, giving us, Jamal, probably one of the most comprehensive, thorough analyses of the historical significance of the relationship between Algeria and Morocco, and bringing us up to date. I mean, in my mind, it feels like it's a much more serious situation than we even realize. Although he doesn't believe that they're going to go to war, these relations are very strained, and it can't be good for North Africa and the rest of the region.
Yeah, and also there are a lot of unknowns. One of the unknowns is, of course, Israel restoring ties with Morocco.
Well, I think that's right, Jamal. Algeria has been through the equivalent of multiple Arab Springs over the decades, including a very damaging and overcoming a brutal occupation of the French, and even afterwards going through its own internal political struggles. And Algeria remains, in some ways, a very stable North African country. Morocco, on the other hand, Jamal, is playing this kind of game about, and this may be a proxy, what's happening between Algeria and Morocco may be like a example of multiple proxy wars that are going on, political and intelligence services in Africa, with the United States and the Israelis trying to gain a foothold in the region, and other countries and interests kind of trying to block that. We know that similar things are happening in Sudan, and there's similar things happening in other Central and Southern African areas. So we can learn a lot from what's happening between Morocco and Algeria right now, because Africa is part of a larger proxy war going on right now.
You're right. And it's, Algeria, Morocco always considered itself as the gateway to Europe for entire Africa. I mean, this is how they kind of, and they also perceive themselves as the link between Africa and Europe. And this is what the king likes to kind of be in that position.
Right.
So, and he does maintain good, Morocco maintains good relations with, its neighbors, with the exception with this issue with the Western Sahara, and also with Europe, with Spain, with France, with the EU, with the United States, as you've mentioned. It's very important. And Algeria, as of recently, actually, has had a major rapprochement with the rest of Europe.
Right.
I mean, aside from its issues with France in the past, because France has never apologized for what it had done in Algeria, nevertheless, it's a strong ally. It's a strong ally to NATO. It's a strong ally to the EU. And then, of course, the Arab world, and not to mention, it's a major producer of oil. In the region. Morocco does not have that. That's why when Professor Berrahmoun, we started talking about in 1975, when they had a similar issue, Algeria expelled close to 350,000 Moroccans working there. And they work there because, Algeria offers employment.
That's right.
Out of all of Northern Africa. In fact, the other country that used to offer employment to both Moroccans and Tunisians is Libya. During its prime days, that's all has gone. But Algeria is still a major oil producer. It's a major strategic. It has a major strategic location on the Mediterranean, and so there is a rivalry between that leadership, whether it's going to be in Algeria or in Morocco. You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. I'm going to shift gears here, Jess, and I guess President Biden declared victory this week, and he said, we shifted the thing to the evacuation campaign, and he described the evacuation campaign as an extraordinary success. Do you think this was the case?
Well, Jamal, 20 years and $3 trillion later, massive corruption, massive loss of treasure, of blood, of American and Afghan lives, destroyed, injured, and decimated. it was difficult for me and for many people to hear Biden declare this as a victory. But I will say this: he was very careful to parse out the victory claim from the war effort, from the evacuation effort. I would say that evacuating 120,000 plus people in that short period of time, you could make the argument, and I could see him making the argument, that was an extraordinarily successful event. But that's just focusing on the evacuation. That says nothing about what was left in its wake, what's left behind, the trillions of dollars that were wasted, the corruption of the previous governments, and the kind of vacuum that's now created in Afghanistan. And, his big promise that any American who wanted to come back to the United States, they would stay and do that. As it turns out, there's still a couple of hundred Americans still in Afghanistan for some reason. They didn't give a lot of details. And there are literally tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of people who want to leave, who are at the border with Pakistan, who are at other borders, who are unable to get process. And I will say, having spoken to some Afghans this last week, Jamal, there are thousands and thousands of Afghans who did work with the U.S. military who are in hiding right now, who fear that if the Taliban were to find them, they would be, killed or taken prisoner immediately. So, Biden parsed his words very carefully. Was the evacuation success? Okay, let's give him that. Let's give him some credit for finally ending the devastating impact of 20 years of ruining a country. And I'll end, Jamal, by asking you a question. When was the last time that an American or any occupation, American, Israeli, whatever, whomever, French, since we're on the topic of Algeria, when was the last time in our modern memory, or even not so modern memory, where the occupation of a country has turned out to be successful? This is a catastrophe.
It always ends in misery. I mean, that's a fact. And it's good that you've mentioned the the French occupation and colonization of Algeria. It cost the Algerians over 1 million lives. Imagine. And not to mention those who disappeared and all those who had to leave the country because they were collaborating with the French and ended up in France. It destroyed so many lives. It's unspeakable, actually, what the French had done in Algeria. But we can cite so many examples. Vietnam is one, another one. The occupation of Israel and colonization of Palestine is another one. And you go down the list.
And Central and South America, Jamal, yes, with various occupations. So
where the United States ends up with mud on its face all the time. When the United States is involved, it ends up with mud on its face, and that's the sad thing. So I actually agree with you. We give President Biden a lot of credit for actually having the will and the strength to say that's enough. 20 years is enough. Trump was talking about this. He didn't do it. He didn't have the guts to do it. He did it, and he did it very fast with the last unfortunate attack that cost American lives and scores of Afghan innocent lives who are trying to leave the country. Aside from this, there is no withdrawal that's going to look rosy and beautiful. And according to the figures that were now given by the State Department, they put that there are under 300 people who are Americans or visa holders or green card holders who remain in the country in Afghanistan, some by choice and others because they are unable to make it to the airport. That's on the kind of the American side. The Taliban has been playing nice. They're saying, they're going to allow people who have visas and passports, they'll allow them to leave. And they're talking about not only the Americans, remember the Brits also, they're now evacuating people. So if, like you said, going from 120,000 plus to just 300.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
Not a single day, all the media showed you the last soldier who withdrew, that you don't have American boots on the ground. We don't have to worry about that. We don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine just the sad thing, the 13 Americans, Jess,
Right.
who lost their lives just the last month. And how many more would have lost their lives had we remained there?
Absolutely, Jamal. That's precisely the point, is that and I think Biden was, and I'm not a big fan of agreeing with Biden on many things, so don't get me wrong. But he was very precise and very forceful about saying the only two options were escalation or ending the occupation and removing all a military footprint in Afghanistan. There was no in between. And the problem with Bush, Obama, and then Trump is that they felt that they could do this kind of half in, half out. The breaking news for people who have ever been occupiers, whether it's the French or the Israelis or the Americans, there's no half in or half out. You're either all in or you're all out when it comes to an occupation. So Biden is the only one who had the courage to call it what it was, be clear about it, take the accountability for it, which I do give him credit for, and removing the U.S. presence. But the larger issue, which history will judge the United States very harshly on, Jamal, is that the United States committed and continues to commit the same grievous mistakes about believing that it can bring democracy to other places by force. This has been, look at what happened in Iraq. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. Look at what's happening with the American pseudo-occupation or semi-occupation in Syria with all of the military personnel that are in Syria right now. I don't think we can point to any example where the military intervention has actually proved to be successful at all. Now, I will say, though, the destabilized Afghanistan, destabilized Iraq, destabilized Syria, destabilized Lebanon probably has some advantage or serves the strategic interests. I think the Israelis believe that. I think that's incorrect. I think the Americans believed it was strategically in their best interest to get out temporarily. But what we're going to see, as we've seen in the past, Jamal, when these regions get destabilized, they get flooded by people who, may not have the best interests of the United States in mind, whether that's ISIS-K or other derivations. It's going to be ugly and messy for a long time.
Well, we cannot keep policing the word.
No.
I mean, this has been said time and time again. There are countries, regional countries, who would like to drag you into their own issues. Going to Afghanistan supposedly had a purpose. The purpose is over, has been over for many years.
17 years.
There is no reason to stay there. We've seen the Israeli Prime Minister just last week right here in the United States to talk about Iran. Actually, Biden kind of shifted the conversation from what I read and what I've heard about Iran, because this is what his predecessor, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been trying to do for the past decade, is to drag the United States into another war. And so hopefully we are smarter.
I don't think so.
Not to drag in, hopefully, because there are people on a regional thing like, who applauded the destruction of, for example, Iraq. I know Israel is one of the big cheerleaders.
Right.
Who a country that wanted to see the destruction of Iraq. So was Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And look what happened to Iraq. Look at an ancient civilization that has not yet recovered. And again, we talked about Afghanistan and the billions of dollars we poured into Iraq. Is Iraq better off today than before the war, the invasion of Iraq?
No, Iraq is not better off. Afghanistan is not better off. Syria is not better off. All of these
are we better off? Is the United States better off?
That's a great point, Jamal, because the only institutions that benefited from those trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan were military contractors, the industrial military complex, and all the corrupt officials in Iraq and Afghanistan who pocketed so much of the money. It didn't help any of the people on the ground. In fact, you could argue that people in Afghanistan, their lives are much worse off. In Iraq, for sure, 100% much worse off than they were prior to these invasions. So I just want to say...
There is one war I support the United States to be engaged in. Do you know what war is this?
Which one?
The war against COVID. If we want to put our resources... That's the war. It's an internal war also to get all these anti-vaxxers
I would say it a little
to be
differently.
vaccinated.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about what's going on halfway across the globe when we have people who are still dying in this country. We have people who are still unemployed in this country. I mean, we don't know what's ahead of us.
No, Jamal.
And so the last thing we want to be dragged into something outside the United States.
Yeah, but we still have 23% of children in the United States going to bed hungry, still. And do you think that $3 trillion and the numbers would have helped the poverty and disenfranchisement of so many millions of Americans? And the other thing is, if you look at the 40,000 servicemen that are permanently disabled for the rest of their lives and the thousands that were killed, servicemen and women, how they could have contributed to the economy had they not been injured or lost their lives. I just wanted to say one thing I agree with you on the war against COVID, but I would say the war is not against COVID, Jamal. It's a war against ignorance, because we have the capability, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, to win the war against COVID. If everybody got vaccinated, we would, in fact, be completely victorious. But the real war, Jamal, is a war against ignorance, and we have an ignorance problem in the United States. I'm still watching people on TV saying, even after the full approval from the FDA, not the emergency use, full approval for the Pfizer vaccine, you still have people saying on the national news, well, I'm not so sure, I trust it, more study needs to be done. I mean, would you look at the side effect profile versus what happens if you get COVID, the difference is just staggering. There's, 95% of the people who are hospitalized in the United States right now are the unvaccinated, and more children are dying. More and more children are getting sick. So it's the war against ignorance, in my humble opinion. And that's just not COVID. That's a lot of things in this country.
So before we go, we have a few minutes.
Yeah.
So after the meeting, going back to Israel and Naftali Bennett coming to the United States, Biden put some pressure on him to say, you got to meet with the Palestinians. So his defense minister, Benny Gantz, met with President Mahmoud Abbas.
What a joke.
And actually from the Palestinian end, we didn't get anything about what transpired. I'm getting all this information. Guess from where? From the Israeli media.
Right,
because they leaked a lot of the information to the Israeli media. And of course, now Palestinian factions are going crazy and they're condemning the meeting between Gantz and Abbas as a dangerous development. And they're calling it a stab in the back to the Palestinians. And during that meeting, of course, who was in that meeting? We know that Hussein Sheikh, head of the Palestinian General Authority Civil Affairs, attended the meeting. Also, Majid Faraj, head of the Palestinian Authority General Intelligence. And according to Israel, Gantz made a series of goodwill gestures to the Palestinian Authority. And so the one gesture that he made was to give a loan to the PA, 500 million shekels, Israeli shekels.
Loaning the Palestinians money that is theirs.
Exactly. And that was the money
that
basically that's held.
The tax money.
That's basically held, the tax money or the VAT that Israel holds on Palestinian exports and imports. They said, we'll loan you Against that, 500 million shekels.
Unbelievable.
And so you look at it again, here we go again. It's everything that they're doing is just to maintain the status quo, because Israel now and apparently President Biden, they're both worried that the Palestinian Authority might collapse and they might lose Mahmoud Abbas. So they're still hanging on to Mahmoud Abbas, basically, and the Palestinian Authority, and maintaining the status quo. And this is not what the Palestinians want. They'd like to see some change.
Yeah.
And then added to this, they're back to, guess what, talking about what? Security coordination. Security coordination and economic improvement for Palestinian lives. They're not talking about an independent state. They are not talking about withdrawing from Area C in the West Bank. They are not talking about... It's just like you look at it, and I don't know if you want to laugh or you want to cry. I looked at the details, some of the minutes of the meeting. Abbas, so there is some stuff we don't have it because he met privately, and others he had other people included. But again, they're talking about crazy things, allowing additional 16,000 Palestinians to work in Israel and having the civil administration approve more Palestinian building projects in Area C, which Israel was supposed to withdraw from that ages ago. Now they have to go through Israel to get their building permits. And it said, we are now... this is from Gantz, his words. I came to the meeting to build trust and safeguard the interests of the state of Israel and to strengthen our important ties with the Palestinian Authority.
Well, I could safely say, Jamal, that I both laugh and cry that this will be yet another failure. This was to give Biden a little cover, but of course it's going to fail. We still see massive demonstrations on the border between Gaza and the Israeli checkpoints. The situation, the drumbeats of war, nothing was mentioned about what's happening in Gaza, the blockade of Gaza, the largest, open-air prison in the world, the squeezing of Gaza. Nothing was said in the leaked minutes of the meeting with President Abbas. I'm afraid that this is yet another example of being in denial of the Israeli occupation, both the Israelis, the Americans, and Mahmoud Abbas, the denial of how bad the situation is right now, and it's not going to get better with these false deals. It's ridiculous, to put it mildly.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download our latest shows, and we will talk to you next week.
See you next week.